Just a word of warning, I made a few notes. Paul, you got nothing on me. No, this is the book that Sean Doyle and I are working on the Revolutionary War soldiers. It is currently at 825 pages. I think we're talking volumes now, not one book. But so far we have 460 patriots or their widows that we have found who lived, died, or are buried in Oswego County. We decided that we had to include the widows even if they came here after their husbands died. And if you have any that I don't know about, tell me please. So there are 61 cemeteries in the county that have Revolutionary War patriots buried in them. We're working on getting patriot burial markers from the Pomeroy Foundation for each of them. So far we have 14 of them from previous rounds, and we applied for 10 more in this round, and just last week we found out we got all of them. So the next round I'm hoping to submit 10 more. I am driving the SAR nuts. Because I write them up, I give them to the president of the SAR, and he's the one that actually has to submit them because only the SAR can submit them. So we will have dedication ceremonies for each of them. So who are our Revolutionary War patriots? During the Revolutionary War, this was not a real hospitable place to live. If you lived here, you were probably going to get scalped. So they came after the Revolutionary War, with one exception that I'll tell you about in a minute. But most of or a good share of our earliest settlers were Revolutionary War patriots. Asa Rice was the first permanent settler in Oswego town. And at some point, George DeMass will tell you about him. We have a really great account of how he got here from where he lived previously. But so far, the only proof that I found of his service is a Patriot burial card. And the downside to that is that Pomeroy Foundation tells me a lot of those were created when the DAR did dedications of the graves. So they don't consider that to be a source document. I am looking at Asa Royce, R-O-Y-C-E, as a possible misspelling of his name. Or morph of his name, whatever. So, Henry Williams Williamstown was named after Henry Williams. Solomon Smith was the first permanent settler in New Haven, and it was actually easier to prove that he was a Revolutionary War soldier than find source documentation that he was the first settler because there were no newspapers. So there was this little line on his headstone I could never read. And a family member of mine cleaned the stone, whiter than white. I still couldn't read the darn thing. He sent me a picture with the right light. That little line said, first settlers in the area coming in 1800. Nice. Source documentations, written in stone. Oliver Stevens was the first permanent settler in Hastings, and he built the blockhouse at Brewerton. Nathan Sage was the first permanent settler in Redfield. And we'll talk more about him in a minute. Thomas Sprague was the first permanent settler in the town of Hannibal. So, as I said, none of these guys lived here during the Revolutionary War, with the exception of David Ogden. There are a few more, I'm sure, I just haven't identified them. David Ogden did not live here by choice. When he was 16, he joined the Army. And he was guarding a party of men chopping wood at Fort Stanwix when he was taken captive by Joseph Brant and the Tories. And we have a really great account of his trip to where he, where they took them, and I forgot the name of the fort now. And he ran the gauntlet, and then he was adopted by an Indian squaw. He was 16. He was young enough that they would have an interest. So an Indian squaw adopted him in place of a son that she had lost. And then after a couple of years of living with the Indians, technically as an Indian, but he said as a slave, he along with a bunch of Indians were called to Fort Oswego. And he, along with a man named Danforth, escaped from Fort Oswego across the river and had a really narrow escape. We have a great account of all of that. Unfortunately, I don't know who Danforth is, or I'd get to count him too. But I guess I put him in there probably. From Oswego, we had Edward O'Connor. He was in charge of a company in Colonel Marinus Willett's unsuccessful attempt to seize Fort Ontario in February of 1783. After the war, he moved to Oswego, taught school in a log cabin, and was probably the first one to teach school in Oswego, in the village of Oswego. He was the first town clerk in the village of Oswego. He had 3 daughters, Cecilia, who was unmarried, Catherine, who married John H. Lord Jr., who founded the oldest newspaper in Oswego County, the Palladium, and Mary, who married Alvin Bronson. Jacob Russell from Oswego. After the Revolutionary War, he enlisted in the United States Army in 1795, and in 1796 he was stationed at Oswego, and he died there in 1798. So he lived there for a couple of years at the fort. Jesse Hacks also served in the War of 1812. He died at Fort Oswego from illness contracted in the line of duty in 1813. So then we have some loyalists, and Mark at some point will tell us about the loyalists. But Daniel Dunham from Hannibal was a loyalist. I had his write-up all done for, the Patriots. Had his pension, everything. I knew I had the right guy. And Lowell Newvine, the historian in Hannibal, called. He says, we have a problem. He says, Daniel Dunham's, however many great-granddaughter called. She confirmed that he was a loyalist, but he was British. So that had me swinging for a while because I knew I had the right guy. She knew she had the right guy. Well, my best thinking, 2 a.m., of course. Check the timeline. So, Daniel had fought on the side of the British as a loyalist, went to Canada because it got too hot around here, and continued to fight on the side of the British. Then he applied for compensation for his losses as a loyalist. All I can figure is he must not have got what he thought he was entitled to, because he switched sides and fought for the Americans. And he got a pension and a land grant. James Jarrett deserted at Saratoga, was British, and he deserted at Saratoga in 1777. I've been looking for proof that James Jarrett fought on the American side for years. Well, I submitted the application for the Patriot burial sign for the New Haven Rural Cemetery. I had 10 guys on there. Pomeroy threw one of them out because it's not an original headstone and we couldn't find any other documentation he was buried there. But John says, but I found another one that you don't have on your list. I says, not James Jarrett. Yeah. Well, how in blue blazes did you prove him? I tried spelling Jarrett every way I could. J-E-R-R-E-T-T. Tried spelling it with one R, one T, with a D instead of the T's. Nothing. never thought to change the J to a G. So we got her 10. Conrad Hay also deserted at Saratoga in 1777. And we knew nothing about him. He was not on anybody's list. One day I got a call from one of his descendants, wanted to know more about his ancestor. He even had the pension. It said that he filed for his pension in New Haven. All the deserters went to New Haven. I've got 3. The one I haven't proved that he's served on the American side, but they all wound up in New Haven. So I got his pension, and I read it, and it said that he filed while he was living in New Haven. But I couldn't find anything else on him at all, to show he was ever in New Haven. So I went to look at land records and found where he bought property in Scriba, just across the town line. So he was right on the town line. So his descendant was quite happy to find out where he lived, even if it wasn't New Haven. I'm assuming he may have lived in New Haven at some time, or he may not have known that he actually was in the town of Scriba. He was a Hessian and only spoke German. So we cannot find where he's buried. I suspect that it's in the North Scriba Cemetery because it's just down the road from where his property was. And his grandson is there. Okay, this one I'm going to mispronounce his first name no matter how many times I say it. Melanchthon Woolsey. His father was a colonel in the British Army during the French and Indian War. Melanchthon was in the American Revolutionary War. His son, Commander Melanchthon Tyler Woolsey, commanded at Oswego in 1812 and later at Sackett's Harbor. The popular restaurant that was in Oswego from 1976 to about 2003 was named after this Melanchthon Woolsey. The grandson served in the Civil War, also with same name, and the great-grandson, also Melanchthon, didn't find any service for him, but there was 5 generations of Melanchthon Woolseys. Melanchthon was buried in the 5th Ward Cemetery, and when they closed that, his body was moved to Riverside. Nathan Sage lived in Richland, and for the longest time, they could not figure what became of him. All they knew was he moved out west. Who knew that Riverside Cemetery was out west? West of Richland. He moved to Oswego, and he was buried in the 4th Ward Cemetery and then moved to Riverside. Timothy Olmsted was a Fife major. He enlisted at the age of 16, well, maybe 15. At 16, he was promoted to Fife major. Now, a fifer played fife and relayed the orders to the troops. So they knew when to march, when to stop, when to go to bed, when to get up in the morning. This was all from the fifes and the drums. So the Fife major was the person who was in charge of the other 8 fifers in the unit. He was in charge of training them, teaching them the tunes that they had to play. After the war, from 1782 until at least the 1810s, he worked consistently as a music teacher, composer, and church musician in various capacities. He was one of the first American composers. Timothy composed marches and hymns, and was sometimes referred to as the American Mozart. And I have tried really hard to find sheet music. I think I found 2 of them that he wrote. But I did find a book that he wrote teaching how to read and play music. It was apparently new from just playing what you felt. So let's not forget the widows. Now, the women. During the war, when the men went off to fight, the women stayed behind, took care of the farm, the animals, in addition to their full-time job as housewife and mother. Sometimes they fought. When the Tories and Indians attacked, they did what they could to defend their homes and their families. A lot of them died. Oh, they weren't widows then. But anyhow, but when our veterans came to Oswego County, there was nothing here really. It was all timber. They followed Indian trails, marks notched into trees. And the women came and had to make a home in that. Elizabeth Wise was one of these women. She happens to be my ancestor. She came to Clay in 1822 with her two youngest sons. She was living in Volney by 1839. The matter of her pension was not settled until after her death. And this, from what I'm seeing, is not all that uncommon. So after the patriot or the widow's death, their children would file for the money that was due to their parents. And sometimes the land that was due to them as bounty land. Pensions were not available till 1818. A lot of the veterans died before the pensions were available. And the widows weren't allowed pensions till long after that. But when I'm looking for these soldiers, I started off with a list from all of the towns, the ones they had. Richland started with 17 when Sean started researching them. He was up to 40 something when I started in. Richland is now at 64, which is the most. The northern towns tended to develop first because it wasn't safe to settle in Oswego until after the British finally left the fort 13 years after the war ended. So, they settled along the military road, which was Richland, Redfield, and into Mexico. So Mexico comes in second for the number of patriots. They have 45. The only town, I think, in the county that I have not found any patriots in is Minetto. Doesn't mean that none of them live there. It just means Minetto didn't exist yet, and they're getting, when they did their pensions, so they're counted as Oswego or Granby. I think it was from those two towns. Now, Oswego City, I only show 4, and one of those was a widow. But I have 17 that just said Oswego. We don't know if that's Oswego Town, Oswego City, Oswego Village. So, it's kind of split between those. The main source that I have for information on the Patriots is Fold 3. I go on there and I find their pensions that are written in chicken scratch. They're anywhere from 17 pages to 125. And you can go pretty cross-eyed, but fortunately my writing's bad enough I can read some pretty bad writing. But about 2 months ago, all of a sudden, this button appears, translate. So AI will translate that chicken scratch to something readable, most of the time. You do have to be careful, because it may misread Otsego as Oswego, or Oswego as Oswego. And sometimes you look at it and it's like, okay, that's not in Oswego County. Then you go back and you look at the chicken scratch and see what it says. I do have a mystery that I'm working on, and I would love it if somebody could solve this for me. I have a widow. Actually, the Patriot lived in Oswego County too. But in the pension paper, their daughter said that the patriot died in Mexico, New York. In Mexico, Oswego, New York. And that his widow outlived him by at least 5 years and died in Barry, B-A-R-R-Y, Oswego, New York. So there's a couple of theories. One is every Four Corners had a name. So, you know, was there a Four Corners in, you know, somewhere in Oswego County that went by Barry? Or the daughter signed with an X. So she probably did not read or write. So the person taking her statement may have heard that she died in Barry, Oswego, New York. And she may have said, died and buried in Oswego, New York.
Oh, it is right there.
So that's my theory.
Yeah.
But when I get what I can from the pensions, I go to find a grave for clues. Sometimes I find where they're buried that way, and get pictures of their headstones and everything. Of course, I have to go take pictures because I can't take a headstone picture from Find a Grave and put it in the book without their permission. And I do have permission from some. If they're out of state, I will send a message to the person who posted the picture and say, hey, can I use this? Usually they'll say yes. But then I will also go to Ancestry and look for clues. And you search, and they'll have a whole bunch of documents that'll come up that you can look at, and sometimes you find stuff. But eventually I go to the family trees on Ancestry, which we all know are not real accurate. But when you find a family tree, sometimes you get a clue there, and then you can go look at that, follow that lead. Or they may have a list of sources. Now, if their source is another family tree, and their source is another family tree, and their source is another family tree. But sometimes they will post vital records from someplace. And that will confirm what you believed, or even tell you that is where you were looking, where they were born or whatever. So you have to, when you're looking for these, you have to look everywhere and talk to everybody. Sometimes when I'm reading a pension, I'll see a name and it's like, wait a minute, I have him. And this person attested to somebody else's service and said, we served together, and this is who we served under, and this is the battles we served in. And his own pension didn't give me that information. But I can take it from this other person's pension and add to the information we have. What else? So anyhow, the Patriot burial markers, we have dedicated markers for Carly Mills Cemetery in Hastings, Cottonoy Cemetery in Cottonoy, Fairview Cemetery in Williamstown, Hillside Cemetery in Hastings, Maple Lawn Cemetery, also known as Dugway, in Albion, Pulaski Village Cemetery in Pulaski. They have 20 Patriots buried in that cemetery. Riverside Cemetery in Pulaski, Salmon River or Pineville Cemetery in Albion, and 16th Cemetery in Volney. You'll notice they're a little heavy on the North Country. That's because Sean got a 10-year start on researching them. So. We have markers that still need dedications for Pleasant Lawn in Parish, which will be dedicated on the 13th at 9 o'clock. Arthur Cemetery in Mexico, which will be dedicated on the 13th at 10 o'clock. And Sand Hill or Daysville Cemetery in Richland, which will also be dedicated on the 13th at 11 o'clock. Daysville is the one across from the golf course on 3. We also have one for Butterfly Cemetery in New Haven, which we have tentatively scheduled to dedicate on October 10th. and Palermo Center Cemetery in Palermo also for October 10th. The 10 that we've just been approved for are Brookside in Richland, Cleveland Cemetery in Constantia, Constantia Center Cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery in Orwell, Mexico Village Cemetery in Mexico, of course, Myrtle Cemetery in Redfield, New Haven Rural Cemetery in New Haven, which we probably will dedicate the same day we do Butterfly in Palermo. Old Cemetery or Pioneer Cemetery in Phoenix, which is where, who's buried there? Timothy Olmsted is buried. Pekin Hill Cemetery in Orwell, and West Monroe Cemetery. Hope we'll get as many of these as we can this year, but some of them will be carried over till next year. Everybody is invited to any of these dedications. If you follow Halfshire Historical Society, they get posted there. The DAR and the SAR participate a lot with these dedications, especially since the SAR is the ones who technically have to make the applications. Okay, anybody have any questions? Yes.
Where's the Butterfly Cemetery?
Butterfly Cemetery is in New Haven on the road going out towards Bosse's.
I was wondering if that's where
Yep.
it was. Now, the
There's
on
one.
Arthur-
There's one patriot buried there, and he was from Scriba.
Okay, the one in Arthur that's on the George Road?
Yes.
Will there be a dedication at the Barnard Cemetery in Sandy Creek?
We have not gotten around to applying for that one yet. We're having a little difficulty proving stuff there. So we went for the ones we could prove easiest first.
My Patriots there.
It is on our radar. Yes.
Thank you very much. A bit off your topic, but kind of related. Weren't some of them paid in land?
Some of them actually, they were supposed to be paid, but some of them never actually received a cent for their services. So the government promised them land instead of money, but it was quite a few years before the land grants became available, and a lot of them had passed away. And when they finally got their land grants, they were like in Granby and Lysander. And they had already built their homes, raised their families, they were settled where they were. So a lot of them never actually occupied that land. Instead, they sold it to someone else, usually for pennies on the dollar.
What's the, is it Pomeroy?
The William G. Pomeroy Foundation.
What are they?
The William G. Pomeroy Foundation gives grants for historic markers. If you're driving around, you'll see a big blue marker, metal marker. It's about this high. And it'll have yellow writing on it. They do markers for places. Mark's gotten a few.
In Oswego, if you go down to the Market House, in the area just north of the Market House, there's a little green space.
Can you guys hear him back there?
There's a marker there. There's a marker in front of the Cahill building. There's a marker for the Freight House on Utica Street. Where else do we have them?
There's a marker at the college.
The Richardson Theater, when you walk up East First Street, where the Costello building is, there's a marker right at the corner of East First and Oneida Streets.
Yep.
Yes.
Bob, what markers are there in Volney?
Well, we have a 16th Cemetery, and then we have, the newer one, that's the latest one. And then we have one at the Boca Van Buren Mansion at the end of the Rowley Road and corner of 157 North. We have 2 of them down, well, actually, there's 2 sites, but 1 marker for Bay Venice in Mount Pleasant, yeah. So I think we've got 7.
We also have a marker on the railroad bridge, a transportation marker.
There's several different categories they do them in. There's the historic markers, there's the transportation markers. Bob mentioned the legends and lures. When you get a Pomeroy sign, you have to prove with source documentation every word on that sign.
Oh, don't we know that?
Oh, yeah, we know that.
We know that.
But fortunately, they're very helpful. I mean, when when I can't find proof of, a patriot's service, they found him for me. But the legends and lures sign is when you can't prove what's there. The legends and lures at Great Bear is how Great Bear got its name. A Native American fought a great bear there and won. And the area was called Great Bear.
Isn't there, I don't know what you're talking about as far as signs go, but isn't there a marker at Perry Hill and 104, Perry Hill, right at the creek?
Right at the creek for Ace of
Yes,
Ace of
that's
Rice.
the Ace of Rice.
For Ace of Rice, yep.
Marker for,
Yep.
Right.
the Rice Family Cemetery is
Right
off the-
behind there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have rubbings off those tombstones
Mm.
from a long time ago, when the people that lived there at the time allowed us to go back in there. Carolyn and Lowell and I went back in. Is there any way through the state that you can make those people allow anybody to go down in there and
If it's
restore
private
that cemetery?
if it's private
Right.
property, they don't have to allow you on there.
So did they buy this, when they bought the place, did they buy this cemetery plot with it?
A lot of times, yes.
Yes, yes.
And the deed probably says that there's a cemetery there. Yeah. So the Pomeroy markers in New Haven, there's one for Audrey Munson. Everybody know who Audrey Munson was? I'm seeing a head shake back there. Audrey Munson was the first American supermodel. She posed for a lot of statues in New York City. She generally posed nude because the artist needed to see the body, not the clothes. She also did a couple of silent movies in the nude. At some point, she had a nervous breakdown and wound up at Ogdensburg for, And at some point, they decided that she was probably okay and she could leave, but she was happy, so they let her stay. She died there at 105 years old.
I think she posted the Liberty coin too.
But,
The Liberty
Yes.
coin as well.
yes, she's the model for the Liberty coin and the dime.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and she's buried in the New Haven Cemetery because when she died, they couldn't locate any of her family, so they buried her with her father.
What year did she die?
I don't know.
Not that long ago, right?
It was long enough ago now that she could be on a stamp.
Yes.
You'd think I know since Maria and I bought her headstone.
It was, 60s or 70s, I think, wasn't it, or was it more recent?
I think more recent than that.
Yeah.
Google it.
Yeah, she was
Caroline's
born,
looking it up.
Yeah.
she was born on the Eggleston Road, which
has a phone app, just a second.
Yeah.
runs right off of 104 when
Pardon?
halfway between New Haven and Mexico.
The 1996. There you go. The Star Clark Tin Museum has a very beautiful display of Audrey Munson.
Yes, they do.
And there's also a book on her life
Yeah.
that's been published.
Mexico and New Haven have always fought over Audrey Munson. We won. She actually lived in both towns.
Right.
But she's buried in New Haven, so.
I think you'll find the Jared that you're looking for in the North Scarborough rural cemetery?
No, James Jarrett's in New Haven Cemetery.
Oh, okay, because I was just
sit here.
at the rural cemetery the other day and saw what I thought was what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I knew where he was buried. I just couldn't prove that his service. But yeah, his family is still being buried in that plot. The sexton called me one day and said, "Who do you show in this plot? Because they want to bury somebody there, and we don't know who the earliest burials are." And I had compiled a database of all the burials that there, because most of the cemeteries, their records don't go back as far as their burials. At some point in time, and I don't remember what year it was, the state passed a law that said the cemeteries had to keep records, which explains why all of a sudden at the same time, all of the cemeteries started having records. But most of the patriots died before the records were kept, which makes it really hard. In Myrtle Cemetery, which was the last one we got approved, there were a couple of them that didn't have headstones. But the town clerk back then also was in charge of the cemetery, and he kept a book with all the deaths. And we were able to use that book because it was written at the time that they died as the source documentation to prove 3 of them. Most of the cemeteries, you don't have that luxury. Unless they really live to be quite old, So, okay, anything else? Bob?
Well, that's the story about the William G. Pomeroy Foundation is really an interesting one. I was one of those historians that had a very difficult time getting a sign. Deb helped me out tremendously. I worked 3 years on one sign, and there was just part of it they wouldn't do it. But anyway, when I went to the state convention, the ESNE state convention last September, I felt a whole lot better about the whole program when I found out the whole story about Pomeroy. The original sign, yellow-blue sign that you've seen, that was run by New York State. And of course, as we know, New York State is broke. They ran out of money. They couldn't afford to fund it any longer. And at that time, Bill Pomeroy was diagnosed with incurable leukemia. And thank goodness that was 20 years ago. And he's a millionaire from Syracuse, New York. And he wanted something to be a legacy. He was into history. So he decided he'd like to take that program over. However, the rules are going to change. As they say, there's a new sheriff in town. And so now today, we found out actually that when you see those New York State signs, you read those things, and about half of it usually is true. A lot of it's just not true. This date might be correct, but everything this forward is not true.
New York checked nothing.
My grandfather, a friend of my grandfather, told the dude that this is the way it was. It kind of got watered down. When Bill Pomeroy was basically held back. No, if my name's going on it, it's going to be correct. So if you've got a sign that says Pomeroy Foundation on it, it is 100% correct. So for that reason, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and Bob tried forever to prove the Van Buren sign.
Yeah, well, here's one part of it then.
And
They're cousins of President Martin.
Oh, well, yeah, he couldn't put on there that they were cousins of Martin Luther, Martin Van Buren. But he was having trouble proving that house is where it was. And he says, "How do I prove this?" And I looked at him, and I looked at the map on the wall. I says,
Right there.
"It's on the map."
There it was. 1854 map.
Yep, and that was the source document.
And then one, just so you'll know, that particular one, Volker Van Buren, what I was trying to prove was that they were cousins of Martin Van Buren, President Martin Van Buren. And they were. He was. In the Oswego County, history of Oswego County, okay, the nice blue volume set that a lot of us have in our offices, right? It clearly says right in there under the town of Valley, they were cousins, first cousins of President Martin Van Buren. However, the volume is 1877.
It's not a source document.
Volker died in 1866. So 11 years earlier, we couldn't prove it. It's not a source document. So that's how, but I can say, that's how, really, technical they are and true to the word. So
Martin Van Buren came to Oswego, spent
a night or two in Oswego in the home that Larry O'Brien grew
Yeah.
up in.
Yep.
Porterhouse over on East Mohawk Street.
Right.
So there was a lot of Van Burens, and they were all interrelated. Most of them came from Kinderhook, New York, which is near Albany. As
Yeah.
aside to what you were saying, one of the reasons why Bill Pomeroy decided to do signs was, he said as a youngster, they would go for family drives, as a lot of people did back then, and they would stop at all the state historical markers, and it really made an impression on him.
Yeah.
As long as we're talking about it, he also has made an important contribution to the healthcare in
Yes.
Syracuse.
Yes.
The nursing school at Upstate's named for him. He purchased the old Switzers
Switzers, yeah.
in North Syracuse, and
Yeah.
that's a facility now.
He's donated it.
And it's, it's all because of his remarkable recovery.
Yeah,
From-
Switzer's used to be
Or
their
survival.
headquarters, and when they
Yeah.
moved into bigger facilities, he donated that facility.
It's an interesting story about what he's done
Yeah.
in this area.
Hasn't he also participated in helping the New York Genealogical, whatever that society is, with their documentation program, their scanning program?
Yes,
Isn't he helping them
New
fund
York
that?
Biologic and
G&B,
Genealogy
yeah.
or something
Yeah,
like
right.
that.
I
Has
know
a-
which one.
Has a scanning program, and
And he supports that.
he had scanners at his office, and if people brought, if historical societies or whatnot brought their records, they would scan them for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
it's
he
amazing.
provided the
digitizing
manpower to
program
do that.
That he's supporting financially.
He also does do some historical grants. He paid for what we know as the Pomeroy Room at Hampshire Historical Society. It is a room that is lined with shelves of genealogies, 3-ring binders full of genealogies, hundreds of them. And he paid for that room.
They also gave us a grant for part of the expenses of the Dr. Mary Walker exhibit.
Great story.
Okay, anything else, Mary Kay?